and you guys say Lima, Lima, Lima. Very good.
I hate when he does that to me. Okay.
Welcome back.
So everyone can move closer now.
Yeah, come on in.
Pull up a chair if you want to sit. We'll leave a little bit of space in the front for people who want to sit down, but if you can stand, you'll get a better view of this whole situation. Okay. By show of hands, how many people are like growing plants right now at their house?
Awesome.
That's pretty good.
Very
Okay,
good, very good.
who's growing native Hawaiian plants at their house right now? Yeah. Awesome.
Cool. Well,
Okay, so then this will probably just be a refresher for you guys, where you'll see kind of some of the specific techniques that we use. They're really general. We've learned a lot of this from a lot of teachers. One of our most important ones is Randy Umetsu, who is the horticultural specialist down at Limahuli.
he's here with us in our hearts today.
Yeah. And in our techniques.
Yes.
But also people like Mike D'Amato taught us a lot. Some of my teachers out in Washington did a great job. The people down at the Ag Park did a lot to teach me. What else you got?
Derek Foley from when I knew him as in Quiet Backcountry Adventures. He's in Hilo farming a bunch of plants right now somewhere, having a great time. Brian Yamamoto.
Yamamoto-san.
Community College.
Yep.
A lot of great. We come from a very long line of even better, greater teachers, and we're just going to try and impart some of their knowledge onto you.
And as the saying goes, makahana ka ike, you do, you learn. So really the best way to get familiar with all of this is to do it yourself. Start with things that are common, things that you can readily get more material of. Please don't start with endangered or threatened plants. There's just no need to. There are people who are growing them abundantly, and if you really need to have them in your garden, get them from the people who are experienced in growing them. So a really great plant to start with is something like pohinihina. They grow pretty abundantly in landscaping. They are not threatened, not endangered. They are indigenous. Please don't take them from the beach. Yeah. There is not very much of it in terms of the ecosystem. So talk to someone who has it in their yard, or find some other way of getting it, not from the beach.
Yes, buying it from a nursery.
Yes. So we're gonna start with cuttings, just because it's easy. Brendan, you want to kind of go through the basics of it real quick?
Basics of cuttings. So plants, most all of them have incredible cellular structures. They all have at these nodes on the plants the potential to grow either branches, leaves, or roots, usually.
Node is just the place where the new leaf or stem is forming.
Yes, so where each of these stems is coming out from, that's a node. And it's pretty incredible how plants work. It would be crazy if we worked like that.
That'd be nice.
But yeah, so usually what we're trying to do when we're getting a cutting, we're trying to leave a tiny amount of leaf and have a good amount, at least 1 or 2 to 3 nodes on the plant, depending on the plant that we're growing. Pohinihina grows very readily from cutting because of its habit and morphology and how it grows on the beach, and it'll pretty much root at all these nodes as it grows along the ground. But something like rooting hormone will definitely help encourage it to grow roots from those nodes. This is essentially just a powder that tells the plant to activate those cellular structures into growing roots, not leaves. So this just kind of gets into the habit of that. When you get a cutting, it is good to have the freshest material possible. We took these cuttings a short amount ago, but I'll take even just a little bit more off. You want to leave a little bit, you want to leave that bottom node as you take a cutting. So this bottom node, any of the nodes we're going with, but I'll just take a little bit more off the plant so we have more fresh material. And we're left with this bottom node, and depending on the plant, 6-inch cuttings are pretty good, but pohinihina doesn't need to be exactly 6 inches. I'll usually go like a shaka's length in cutting. That's kind of just how we mostly go by things, is lima lengths or shaka lengths. But for this pohinihina, I'll probably just use 3 nodes here. These 2 nodes for rooting, and the top one for growing new growth. Now, there's a couple different ways to grow plants from cuttings. There's all kinds of different methods. We'll probably do a couple different methods in this pohinahina, but I'll probably just show you guys the classic cutting right now. Let me just prepare it. I'm going to trim off a lot of the plant material that's on it. That is currently energy that's being put into these branches. We want almost all of this plant's energy right now to go to making roots and not leaves. We want it to root first. We'll leave a couple little leaves. I'll usually even cut those leaves in half. Just to conserve as much energy as possible while still being able to photosynthesize. That's still important. Some people, depending on the person, will even shed a little bit of that outer bark, getting right into the goodies in there. But pohinahina, you don't really need to. But some plants might actually prefer it.
And actually, something like pohinahina, while it might not need it, you could possibly see rooting faster if you were to do that.
Totally.
But for our purposes, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, taking the plant, having a little bit of rooting powder. I recommend putting your rooting hormone into another vessel besides just continuously using the same, like the bottle. This is a straight from Randy Umetsu method of doing it. If we're just continuing to put many different plant materials into the same bottle, that's a vector for disease.
Pathogens.
Yes, pathogens. No good. So just dipping it around in a little bit of this rooting hormone at the node. You want the rooting hormone to be within the node. That's perfect.
Rooting hormone, is that like a liquid or powder?
This is a powder.
This is
There
powder.
are gels. The gels can be pretty strong.
Yes.
So most Hawaiian plants can take most rooting hormones. But if it's something that you only have a limited material with, I would use probably a weaker rooting hormone than a stronger one. Well, no, it actually depends. I would start with the weaker stuff.
Yeah,
if you're not
for sure.
finding success, try the stronger stuff, but it could possibly burn your plant material. And
Yes.
you might still not end up with
And the stronger the rooting hormone, the more care you should take in getting it on your skin.
We should be wearing gloves.
Yeah.
But we're professionals.
Yes. Now,
Supposedly,
it can
it's-
irritate. It can
it's-
cause some, depending on what it is. Like it's some weird chemicals and hormones and
Cancer.
that thing. So cancer. Yeah.
Yeah.
In your flat, we won't do it for the purpose of this exercise, but you usually want your flat to be wet already, because if you put all your nice little rooting hormone branches in there before it's wet, and then you go to water it after, what are you gonna do? You're gonna wash all that rooting hormone off. All that work that you just did. We don't want to get this place incredibly dirty. It's a really nice room, so it's just gonna turn into a massive slush pile in here if we do that. So just to show you guys for that.
And this is a real nice propagation tray. It's
No.
from Garden Island Hydroponics.
Yes.
They have amazing
Great
horticultural materials. But this is a mushroom tray from
Yes.
Foodland. Elite mushrooms, super tasty. Great trays. You just gotta make sure you put some drainage holes in the bottom.
Yeah.
So you can do that with like a utility knife, or I use a little drill, multi-tool that I have.
Yeah, because obviously if you have a small amount of seeds and you're using a big flat like this, it's kind of a waste of space and a waste of material. If you find little things like that mushroom tray, if you get a little
Tofu trays are great.
yes,
Takeout
absolutely.
containers.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, but if we have the material to fill up a tray like this, especially with cutting, that's amazing and awesome. That's the more plants you're going to get. In order to maximize space, what we've learned over time in the tray is just to put them in diagonally. That's going to let the plant go a little bit deeper. And in this case, it goes right up to that second node that I left right in the middle. And that's just even more places where it's going to root form from. The more roots it has, the faster it's going to make that new growth. Pohinahina, it's not uncommon for all the leaves to die on the plant. You can totally make a cutting with all the leaves on it, and all the leaves will like shrivel up and die, and it'll bounce right back as soon as it gets roots. It's a really great plant to work with. This is the first plant that I learned how to grow out of all the native Hawaiian plants when I grew it with my mentor at the time, Derek Foley. Yeah, it was a great starting plant, and I recommend it if you're doing cuttings. Yeah, just find a good place to get them from.
Me and Brent are bad horticulturalists because our clippers are dull.
Our clippers are dull.
But sharp clippers are really important,
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with material that's a little more finicky than things like pohinahina. because you want a really clean cut that damages as few of the cells as possible.
For sure.
So keep your clippers sharp, way sharper than both of ours.
Yeah.
We're working horticulturalists,
Yeah.
okay? I'm cutting weeds, I'm cutting woody
Many things.
stuff.
What you
alright?
got, Mary? Totally. Your tools, what we use at work, we usually have these tiny little alcohol spray bottles that we also keep on us 100% of the time. And just spraying that tool before you use it, nice, is just gonna decontaminate the tool that you're using. Especially if you're in a job like us where you're going from plant to plant to plant of different species, of different kinds. You're gonna limit the spread of disease a lot by doing that. So take care in your horticultural practice, and yeah, isopropyl alcohol, always solid.
Are there a lot of diseases that are lower the success rate?
Especially with native Hawaiian plants, a lot of the diseases that, our Hawaiian plants didn't have the luxury of growing up with, and developing those kinds of resistances. A big reason why you don't see a lot of native Hawaiian plants today is because of those pathogens or pests, or
Mostly pests, actually.
Mostly pests.
There are pathogens.
yeah,
Nematodes can be a problem for plants in the ground, but in the
Totally.
nursery, it's really just mildews, molds,
For sure.
fungi.
you more get into bigger problems where you get into like fungal things that are a lot bigger picture, like rapidohea death. That's a big
Major
one
problem.
that dirty tools can definitely spread.
Just big molds or funguses that you don't even see.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be.
So,
Right.
well, things might, if you,
Many different.
so if you've
reasons.
seen, so if you see roots form and you're pretty confident that it's doing well and you've got new growth going and then suddenly it starts to die back, unless you see like a direct pest presence, it's probably some kind of rot that's going on underneath, which might just mean too much water, or you could be underwatering and it could just be wilting. What we see more with seedlings is what we call damp off, which is just like a general fungal infection. I think it's a mildew most of the time. And it's where they get their first little cotyledons come out, maybe a true leaf, and then they just melt. And that's a pretty common ailment in nurseries. Damp off, it's just damping off. Is what I'm saying.
So you're putting those in pretty close to each other. Is that just that?
We're gonna maximize the space. Pohinahina especially. What we're gonna do, we're gonna wait. We'll check on the roots every now and again. And you can do that by just gently wiggling out the plant and taking it out, seeing how many roots are on there. You don't want to leave them in for too long because you risk them just kind of decaying and getting all
Or root bound.
rotting, root bound even in something like this. We just want as much material in a flat as possible. And the moment it even starts to develop some nice roots, before they even tangle with each other, we'll just take it out, put it in a new pot, and then that's gonna be it. Totally, the mushroom flat.
Well, think right here. This one, you can't really go, it wouldn't be very many with cuttings because you have to have the space for the material to grow in. So I would probably really, if you're doing really short cuttings, like lots of nodes, you could probably fit them in horizontal in one row. And this way you could probably still only do one row.
Totally. But for flats like these, definitely better for something like seeds that are a lot more of a smaller propagation material that you can put a lot in, especially depending on the size of the seed. Something like ohia, unless you have the material for it, you can use one of these. But
how fast are you gonna be able to pot that up?
Yeah.
How many of those are gonna survive by the time you get to potting them
How
up?
much
Because you could have a
time do you
million
have?
seedlings in a flat like this of ohia.
But if you just want some ohia and you want to try growing some little thing of perlite like this, sprinkling a lot of seed, that's going to be like 100 seed, even more that will fit in this tiny little thing. So
does anybody want to try under our expert supervision?
Yeah,
and get some feedback? You really don't have to, but we do have this material. If anybody wants to experiment, we can give some feedback. It's all perlite. Yeah.
100%. Yes.
There we go.
So yeah. Depends on the plant. With Pohinahina, I'd probably give it maybe 3 weeks before you start checking on them. Yeah.
Generally speaking, plants don't root very fast from cutting.
Yeah.
There are exceptions. There are many
There
exceptions.
are many exceptions.
But
But yeah, actually, Kim brought up a pretty good point earlier when
This
she asked
one we
what the
wanna keep
makeup
that
of the
week
flat
because
was.
You gotta make
So
sure we're
depending
paying
on
attention to
your
the direction it's
situation,
going.
what you have
So
at
where
your
was the bottom?
disposal,
That's fine.
if
So
you
when
are
we
like
make
me
our
and
first
Zico,
cut,
who have
we
a
want to maximize
pretty
the surface
great
area of
nursery
the
with a
hormone.
massive
So we
mist
wanna
system
do
that goes off
a diagonal
2
cut.
times a day,
More
and we
surface
don't
area.
really have to worry
Top,
about
we want
watering.
less surface area
Straight
for
perlite,
out.
great,
Straight
because
cut.
it gets a
And
lot
then
of
also helps
water,
keep track
and
of
you
it.
need that kind of drainage. And
So
this
leave
will act
that
as
leaf,
essentially the media
cut
that
that
it
off,
will root right
and then
into,
take
no
the leaf
dirt
to the
needed.
branches.
The reason why we'll add something like peat moss and other potting soils is to hold that moisture, the moisture.
We'll take them down
So
all
if
the
you
way.
don't have an automatic mist system, if you don't live in Kapahi like me, where it rains pretty much all the time, a great thing is to amend your media with some soil, some actual soil. That's going to hold in moisture. You don't have to water
take it off.
as frequently, like twice a day, like me and Zico. We only use straight perlite because if we didn't use straight perlite, everything would rot, and that would be bad. Yeah, exactly. And dampening off can happen depending on the plant. Of course, when you have a plant like what we work with in Limahuli Olona, one that is adapted for those incredibly wet conditions, even in the mist system, potting soil is pretty good for that as well. But yeah, perlite is good. As you start potting up and it starts getting roots, then you'll probably want to amend it and with some potting soil, but still having a lot of drainage. Drainage is the game. That's kind of where I see most people go wrong, is people don't use drainage in their mix, and they'll just use what's in the potting soil bag. Native Hawaiian plants,
And then we'll just go in.
remember, they came out of straight lava rock and often grow straight on cliffs. These are plants that like drainage. They don't like to just sit in wet conditions unless they're growing in like a bog. So depends on what the plant is, where your area is that you're growing all these plants, what you have at your disposal. There's a lot of different factors, but those are some to keep in mind.
And hopefully get roots going in both of those nodes.
Great job tonight, Andrews.
Andrew.
Give her a hand. Totally.
Whatever one has at the store.
Yes.
0.5, 0.1.
I think this is the 0.1%.
Yeah, this is like the dullest, the less.
Butyric acid is like the most of the time the active ingredient in rooting hormone. There's other ones, but one thing that I really want to emphasize over this whole thing is that plants want to grow.
Yes.
It really doesn't take that much except a little bit of care and time to get these things to grow. And you are going to fail in the process of learning how to do this. It's unavoidable. Plants are going to die. We have things growing super successfully, and all of a sudden they die, and we're like, well, frick. And then you just have to do something different. So,
it's trial and error, a lot of this, and seeing what works for you, especially depending on the area you're at. Keeping log
Keeping
is
records
great.
is really
Keeping
important.
records is great if you don't have the iron memory.
We're lucky because we have each other as a memory bank. We're like, wait, when did we
Absolutely.
sow that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We have more success between two brains.
Yes.
We
And
almost
then
make one.
labeling as well. So again, we're bad horticulturalists, but
We lack crayons.
you can also split propagation trays. So if you look inside here, we have just a little tag that's dividing it. And this is just two different colors of the same species. So we weren't super worried about having them like totally separated.
Yeah.
We also are able to recognize seedlings now by their cotyledons.
Yeah.
I mean, the seeds too, but once they germinate, we're like, oh, that's a Hibiscus St. John's. So the more that you grow these things, the easier it will be to keep track of everything in the end. But when you're starting out, label.
Always
Label what it is, where you got it from, and when you sowed it.
Yes, when you sowed it's really important. Especially if you want to keep logs like that in order to help survival. Yeah, for sure.
So Mike had asked, how long do we expect things to take to root? And I say minimum 3 weeks most of the time. The exceptions for that are, oh, that's spilling. The exceptions for that is going to be things like certain vines, nanea, pohuehue, things like akulikuli and ai. A lot of Hawaiian vines, coastal vines will root really quickly and readily. But for seeds, which we're going to get to now, take a lot longer.
Yes.
I had a flat of noni in the standout that I didn't soak before sowing, and it took 6 months to germinate. And I just sat there every week and I'd be like, nothing yet, nothing yet. And then they all started going off. So the name of the game with horticulture is just patience. Yeah,
Patient.
patience with the plants and patience with yourself. It will take time. So cuttings. Does anyone have any questions on cuttings before we move on to seeds?
Ants, and that's
That's
ants
a very common problem.
as far as pests, and we'll get into a little bit of pest talk a little bit later, but just to quickly summarize ants, they're often the cause of most of the common pest problems that we have in the garden and people's backyards. Ants are farmers like us, except what they farm are pests, usually in the form of scales and other kinds of sucking insects, aphids that just stick onto the, usually if you're looking at your plant and you're seeing that it's looking unhealthy, make sure to look right there.
Yeah.
Right.
And then at the base of the leaves often is where you'll find mealy bugs.
Yeah.
Especially in plants that have deep veins. They'll just tuck right in there and you'll see your leaves start coming out a little bit deformed, and it's because they're being
Yeah,
ants
it's actually
farm them.
pretty
Yeah.
incredible. They are providing conditions for them to grow. They're literally putting them there and waiting for them to get bigger
And
and
they secrete
eating them
honey,
when
dude.
they need
No,
to.
no, they
Or not
secrete
eat,
honey,
they
yeah.
secrete their little
Yeah.
juices. So
Yeah.
they're using them to get a tasty little treat.
Yes.
They're crazy.
Yes.
Eat,
Well, they
eat
eat
their
the juice.
juices that they're excreting. Yeah.
Any other questions? So for cuttings, that helps.
That'll definitely help. Yeah.
The best thing to do is you can kind of just gently smush them.
Hmm.
Yeah, you want to just make sure you don't scratch the stem of the plant.
Spraying
Yeah.
with water will work. Any sort of horticultural oil that helps.
Cayenne.
Cayenne
I
pepper.
don't recommend that if it's windy.
Yeah.
But things like neem oil, which is really readily available in most stores. Horticultural soap, which you can just use dish soap, but I recommend Dr. Bronner's peppermint.
Yeah.
Really, really effective. You can do it in just a spray bottle, or you can apply it by hand with a little sponge, or you can get one of those little, they have a little pump sprayers at hardware stores.
Totally.
So you still, it's just like a sprayer, but you don't have to sit there doing that, and you can get a really fine mist. So those are really, really great for nursery management. Highly recommend that.
I like the idea, Kai. I've never used it, but
Sounds scary.
on a windy day, it could be kind of.
But also on that note of pest control,
yes, totally.
Pohinihina, if you guys have not smelled this, please actually come do so. It
Yeah.
smells really good. And when things smell really good to humans, they usually smell bad to pests. So what you can do if you're like doing cuttings of Pohinihina, or if you have to prune your yard, I recommend just taking all the leaf material, blend it up, let it soak for about a day, strain off the plant material, and just use that juice in conjunction with your horticultural soap, and it's a pretty good natural insecticide.
Yeah, totally.
Yes. Okay, any other things on cutting? So if you have ant problems, you can, if it's a small scale, like grow operation, like if you're just doing it in your yard, you can pick them off by hand. You can use a horticultural soap or the neem, or if you have a larger landscape scale issue, first figure out what kind of ant it is. Where did she go? Kim's here.
Kim's right
Hi, Kim.
there.
Talk to Kiss if you're concerned that it might be little fire ants. There's test kits. They tend not to show up in the horticultural context on Kauai because they have pretty limited range right now. What? Well, I mean, they're in horticultural context, but in most of our yards, we're not going to see little fire ants. Yet. No, never. Because Kiss is going to get rid of them. Because we're all going to be amazing citizens and monitor our
Report them
plants.
when we see them.
Yes, report them when we see them.
I think it's better to assume that they're everywhere, just so you can stay safe and not spread whatever else is in there, even if they're not there. I think it's good to
that
assume.
we're sharing. Whenever you bring anything outside your yard to your yard, plants that you get from friends or
Right.
nurseries or anywhere, mulch or anything like that. That's for little fire
That's
ants.
for little
And
fire
you don't need a kit, quite honestly.
Peanut butter.
Like a chopstick with a little bit of peanut butter on it. Place it next to whatever you're bringing to your property. You wait 20 to 30 minutes, and you take that stick with the peanut butter, put it in a Ziploc baggie, and then put it in the freezer, and then get it to us, and we'll identify the ants.
Totally.
So to summarize,
There are no native ants in Hawaii
Yeah.
Right.
that now have
Yeah.
none of them are good.
None of them are
Yeah.
good.
farmers.
Yeah.
They farm for themselves.
Yeah, selfish
They're-
farmers.
And for farm native plants, better.
To summarize what Kim said, for those that might not have heard on Zoom, you can detect or you can monitor for fire ants, little fire ants, or any ant actually, if you're trying to get it identified. If they are into fats, then you can put a little bit of peanut butter on a chopstick or a popsicle stick, leave it in your yard or a place that's covered, come back, it's like a couple hours sometimes, 20, 30 minutes.
That will all peanut butter and
Right.
eggs.
20 to 30 minutes, come back,
Where'd the
collect
peanut
your
butter go?
chopstick and peanut butter, put it in a little Ziploc bag and freeze it. And then if you're concerned about fire ants, you can send it off to KISC and they will tell you whether it's fire ants or not. And then they'll advise you on what to do next. But in situations where it's not little fire ants, we can confidently treat them. If it's little fire ants, we want to talk to KISC because we can't just bait and poison because that leads to worse things. But for most other black ants, red ants that you'll find in your nursery, there's commercial ant baits available that are really effective. If you want to go organic, things like neem, it's just more time. It's really possible to manage them. You'll never get rid of them, but it's possible to manage them and to have a healthy nursery. Borax is a great option. You can make your own borax traps with a slurry of borax powder and sugar water, or sugar with a little bit of water. Put that in a water bottle on its side, and the ants will come in, get the sugar and the borax, and take it back to the colony. And it's really effective in controlling ant populations. So having those in your nursery ahead of time before you start getting a bunch of material is a great way to keep pest problems down.
Absolutely.
Okay. We
seed.
still have time, but we don't have that much time.
Yeah.
So, any questions about cutting specifically? No? Totally welcome to ask them. You can ask them later too.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you think of any.
Then we're going to move on to seeds. So a big flat like this is great if you have a bunch of material, but you can also go with a small flat, which is what we're going to do today. Most of the time, seeds aren't ready to germinate right when you get them. So getting them ripe is important. Most of the time, if it's a fleshy fruit, that means it's going to be soft. It readily falls off the plant. If it's a dry fruit, that means it's dry, papery, and again, readily falls off the plant. This seed that we have here is from ule, another somewhat common horticultural plant in Hawaii. It's the Hawaiian rose, Osteomelias anthellidifolia rosaceae, which is in the same family as things like apples, plums, strawberries,
Most
raspberries
berries that you love.
Yeah.
Raspberries, blackberries.
And they have a fleshy fruit that's actually pretty tasty, more so on the Big Island where they get larger, but on Hawaii as well. There's only two places I know to see them in the wild on Hawaii. So there's another one. Don't collect plants in the wild.
Yes.
Unless you have a permit.
Yes.
Yeah, full stop. These are from cultivation. They have a hard little stony fruit or a seed on the inside. Most plants benefit greatly from some form of scarification because, as I said, they're not usually ready to go right when you pick them. Scarification can mean taking a nail file to it, nail clippers to it, soaking them in hot water. The thing that we generally do for most seeds is just soak them in water overnight, hand hot. So just run your tap water to as hot as it goes. If it's too hot for you, it's probably too hot for the seed. Then you just soak it overnight. Seeds that float are usually not viable. The seeds that sink are usually viable. There's exceptions to that.
Yes.
There are seeds that love to float, like ma'o, Hawaiian cotton. They're covered in a bunch of fuzz and they will pretty much never sink.
A lot of the native hibiscus start by floating because of the small hairs that are on the seed, and will eventually, when they all get wet, sink down. And then there's some that still float. I usually stay on the safe side and still plant those anyways. But
the only downside of not sowing everything, or the only downside of sowing everything and not taking out the non-viable, is potentially having more vector for disease.
Right, because if that thing starts rotting,
it's a host for molds
Yeah.
and fungus.
for sure.
So you want to talk about how we're going to sow these?
Yeah. So
And our medium as well?
yeah. So like Zico said, ule, great plant. Beautiful
Ule.
and- Yes. Ule.
Because ule means something different.
Look it up. Ask your parents.
Ule.
It's different. Yes. So this plant is gorgeous in the landscape. Like Zico said, bunch of about 5 to 6 little seeds within the fruits.
I'm gonna pass the jar around.
Yeah, totally. You guys get a closer look. You can feel the seeds too. get a good look at them. Yes, these are real seeds. Technically. Yeah,
Yeah, white
yeah,
puppy fruit.
little
They
white.
kind of
fruit.
sometimes turn a little pinkish purplish.
Yeah, yeah.
They're astringent, the
Mhm.
flavor. Yes, Cassie? It's a good question.
Yeah. Depends on, usually as you go further and further into this world, you know kind of which ones to scarify, generally by reading in books or what other people have experiences, asking around. Generally, if it's like a bigger, hardier seed with a really tough seed coat that you can feel, that's generally one that you might want to take a file to and scarify a little bit more. Uh, Generally speaking, soaking any and all seeds is probably good. There are some exceptions that won't really make a difference whether you soak it or not. It's just gonna not sprout for a pretty long time, some of them.
Some seeds are hard to sow when they're wet. So if
Yes.
you do soak them, you might want to dry them out again, but you can just pour them onto some coffee filters and let them dry out.
Totally.
There's actually a little trick with knowing which plants to scarify. It requires knowing a little bit of the ecology of the plant, but if it's from a dryland area or coastal, it probably needs to be soaked and probably scarified as well, just because they're in an environment that's a little harsher, meaning they wait for ideal conditions,
Totally.
wet conditions, after they've kind of been worn down and worked into the soil a little bit, so they have a better chance of survival once they germinate.
Right.
Okay. So for, okay. Yeah, question?
What part of the lady is?
Oh, the fruit.
The fruit itself.
So you create, are you doing that?
No, it's a really small fruit.
Yeah.
They're smaller than a blueberry most of the time.
Mhm.
And I just mean when you taste them, they are astringent.
Yeah, yeah.
You have some seeds in your hand?
I got 3.
Two? Oh, okay, actually, so flats are great if you have a fair number of seeds.
Yeah.
And what they do is also it has more media, which allows you to leave the seedlings in there longer. So for our, in our jobs, we actually like nursery management is like not even technically a part of our job description.
Yeah.
It's just something that we also have to do, and so we don't get around to potting things up really frequently. So having the ability to leave them in their flat for a long time is great.
Ideal. Yeah,
Ideal,
yeah.
and that's gets into some fertilization techniques as well. But you can also just sow seeds directly into a pot. The risk is wasting material. So if your seed doesn't germinate, this material has now been hanging out in the sun, degrading, possibly picking up pathogens. Just breaking down. Let's say something about that.
Taking up space.
Taking up space. Decomposing. Yeah, they take up space in the nursery, so it's much more space efficient to use a flat. But if you only have a few seeds, if you're only planning on growing a few things, totally acceptable and encouraged, really.
Yeah.
It allows you to monitor it more closely. Yeah, you can actually. No, yeah, I got a few more of those. Where did I put the little one? Yeah, those ones.
You do have some.
So we'll sow individually. We'll sow a seed right here. So we have our media, which is just we use that white bag out there. It's Pro Mix. It's moss that's been composted with. That's pretty much just moss that's been composted, and then perlite, which is a puffed mineral. We scoop it up. We don't compress it. Yeah. So it's nice and fluffy in here. It kind of springs back a little bit.
That leaves room for eventual roots to just kind of grow through a lot more easier.
Make it easy for the plant.
Totally.
Most of the time, you can just set the seed right on top.
And that's called surface sowing. And you can pretty much get away with a lot of horticulture here and growing these plants just by surface sowing your seeds. You don't really have to bury most of them. Some you can.
Most of the time, it's not really advisable.
Yeah.
Because they kind of have to struggle against their media, and unless you have really well draining media, it increases the chance of rotting. But if I was sowing an individual seed, I would very gently cover it. And just slightly tamp down the surface.
When you water them, when you press it.
Depends on how you water it.
Depends on how you water.
What we'll use, if you have a hose with any mist option on there, that's perfect. And leaving it even a little higher up, just letting it slowly dribble on. We are lucky and have something like this, a mist system that waters all of our stuff, but you want to be very gentle and careful with seeds or seedlings.
Yeah.
When they get a little bit bigger like this, you can start getting nice little shower options to
make it a little faster.
Totally.
But yeah, watering, it's a finesse game. but once things germinate, they're a little safer.
Yeah.
Don't use the mist setting on dry perlite because it just
Yes,
blows
it
it
just
all away.
blows it all away. Especially if you have
Hilarious
a
every time
strong
someone does
PSI.
that. But
Yeah.
so this seed is sown. You'd add some water. Once it germinates, if you want it to grow quickly and to up pot quickly, you could add a little bit of fertilizer. Those rates are all available in various horticultural books. There's one that we highly recommend, just growing Hawaiian plants.
Yeah, and this is the book in the back is just a summarized version of that book.
Yeah.
Same author.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But really what you can just pretty much stick to, it's really easy to grow Hawaiian plants organically. They don't really have super high nutrient needs. It's a little bit more work, but you can use organic fertilizer and compost and it totally gets the job done. In our context, we used the slow release fertilizer, Osmocote. Most people are familiar with it. It's in a lot of potting mixes already. Once it germinates, once your seedlings germinate, you can put a little bit of this in your propagation flat and it'll help them grow a little bit more vigorously. But if you want them to kind of just chill out in that flat and give you more time to up pot them, I wouldn't add the fertilizer. Add it after you up pot.
Totally.
Okay. Can I get those seeds back? Where'd they go?
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, thank you. It's like which one are you took? So in a context like this where you have the flat available, simply just taking some of the seeds, doing your best little Salt Bay impression, just seasoning the flat, making sure the seeds are nice and spread out from each other. If they get too close to each other, you risk them either trading pathogens or kind of growing into each other. Yeah.
Oh, come on this side.
Oh, on this. Okay. I gotcha. So yeah, essentially just seasoning your little tray with tiny seeds is the best way to do it.
Small seeds, like ohia, like super fine seeds, don't do it somewhere windy. They'll all blow away.
They'll blow away for sure.
And you can kind of just treat it like they're pretty much grains of sand in terms of size. They're smaller than grains of sand. So you want to just gently distribute across your media.
And yeah, so the first thing that's going to come up on these plants when they germinate, the first leaves you'll see are not their true leaves, but they're their cotyledons. And depending on if it's a monocot or a dicot, whether it's like something like a grass, which is a monocot that's going to shoot up one monocotyledon.
Grass, palms.
Yeah. Asparagus.
Asparagus.
Yeah. Asparagus. Cool superhero name.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's a dicot, it'll have two, like the ones you're seeing with these.
Yeah, these are the cotyledons of this plant.
You usually want the plant to get at least a couple true leaves before you up pot it into your first 2-inch pot. And that's usually the first great option to go with after you're up potting the seeds, which we'll demonstrate. Yeah, I'll save the rest of that. Flat's pretty good for now.
Excuse me.
Yes, this is it. That rose. And it's, yeah, really pretty. Yeah. If you go up Sleeping Giant, if you want to just get like a nice up close look with some in the wild, at the summit of Sleeping Giant Nono, there's some nice patches here and there that drape along the sides of the mountains. But they're really pretty. They're gorgeous. Or come to like one of our backyards and we'll have lunch. But yeah, I'm keeping these seeds just because I don't want to overcrowd the pot or the flat. And I'll sow the rest of these on a different one.
But this container is a really nice container. It's an easy cup sake container. There's other containers like this, but these are fantastic because they have a translucent lid. So they're anything, you can sow seeds in anything, but if you want to have a safe germination chamber, these are really cheap and really effective. You want the translucent lid because it allows light in from the surface and it allows you to monitor it a little more easily. But if you want to say grow like ohia or peperomia, something with really small seeds that kind of blow away in your nursery or get disrupted by watering, you can put a little bit of cinder or perlite in this vessel. Get it just damp. You don't want any water pooling in the bottom, but then you can sow your seeds right on top, put this lid on it loosely, and watch them germinate. It's a fun activity as well.
And that's especially good if you're in a place like Kekaha, which is
Hot.
very dry, very hot. Water is not super common. And if you're not great at watering things while you're trying to germinate, that's a really great option. It's going to make basically a really tiny greenhouse in a sake jar.
The other option,
Pull the seedlings out, right?
yeah, pretty much. As soon as you get those true leaves coming. Yeah. And the nice thing with the cinder is that you can take the chunk of cinder with it, just pot it up from there. So after we have the seed sown, we would water this in. Again, a gentle shower setting or a mist setting. Ideally, you have damp medium already going, so you don't have to spend a bunch of time soaking the medium.
For sure.
Any questions on sowing seeds? Good question. Depends on where you are. So location, location, location when it comes to growing plants. It depends on how much shade you have, how much sun you have, how much rainfall you get, whether you are growing it in a protected area. If you're like windowsill growing, then you want that media to always be damp, but not soaking. So it's kind of it's a happy medium.
Always damp, never soak.
Always damp, never soak.
Especially with something like cuttings too. Going back to that for a second, you never want your media to dry out, especially if it's all perlite like this, then your roots have really nothing to really get moisture from, and that's gonna shock the plant.
Yeah, while cuttings are really easy, they are dependent on frequent watering and good moisture retention. Yeah, there's tricks with this. So you can do a tray within a tray and then something that has a lid. So if you did like a small container like this, you could put it inside of like a plastic tub that has a clear lid, and that would keep it moist, and you just keep that down.
Exactly what that sake container did, just on a different level.
Microcosm.
Mhm.
Okay, so we have one sown in an individual pot. We have some sown in a flat. We have our cuttings. What happens when they germinate is you see something like this. The cotyledons will pop up. This is a hibiscus. This is a hibiscus St. John's, Kokio ula ula. These are just starting to form some true leaves. So we'll be ready to pot them up now. And we'll use this hula stick because I forgot a knife. But extracting them is a careful operation. You want to gently remove them without damaging the root. That can be really easy for some plants, really hard for some plants. Timing is important. The longer you leave it in the flat, the more roots they'll have, the harder it'll be to do that. So I gently hold the stem of the plant. I'm not pulling up hard. I'm gently, gently pulling up, and then I'm coaxing something like a chopstick or a back of a spoon or a stick of pohina.
A fork is really nice
Forks
because
are
of the
great.
really.
We got the tines. And then you can see here we've got roots. And what you want to see is pretty much what we're looking at here, which is about equal length of roots to stem for the thing you're doing. This is like ideal transplanting size for me. This is the size that I like to do that. Any more roots than that, and you start to get tangled up in there. Any less, and you risk it not surviving transplanting. Some plants have really long roots, the tap roots. A lot of times it's going to be your dry forest species and larger trees. And then others have small matting roots. Those are going to be like your grasses, sedges, coastal shrubs. So I like to damp my medium first. Brennan tends to keep his a little drier than me. Different strokes.
Different.
I will like to use something flat because then I can just put it in and then create a little, I'll just kind of like wedge open a little slot for the seedling to go in. This is uncompressed media. So I just filled it up and gently tapped it down. I'll place the seedling in, and then I'll gently move the soil around it.
Totally. Another important thing to remember when handling the seedlings, their stems are incredibly fragile.
Super fragile.
Unless you have a very nice steady hand like Ezikio. Sometimes it's nicer just to hold the cotyledons as well when handling them, because if you squeeze that stem even like a little bit, it can kill the plant. Yeah.
Now we have an up potted hibiscus. Does anyone want to try?
If you kill one.
These are started
Yes,
from seed.
yes. You can
These
actually
are started
still
about a
see-
month ago.
Yeah, if you get up close and look at it, you'll still see the seeds on some of the cotyledons on these hibiscus.
I'm actually going to just do it for the sake of time. We give me another little.
Yeah. And this is the great part about being a little team, you know? If you have friends that are into this, we only have so many hands. We often talk about what we would do if we had 4 hands.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Even just a third would be
A
nice.
third would be great. Just to hold the tray while you do the stuff
Oh,
in the tray.
God.
Don't need tables anymore. Brick tables, they're expensive. Do you know how much
Going off
horticultural
again.
table costs?
Anybody? Any guesses on the horticultural table?
How much does a horticultural table cost? Like the standard?
400,
No.
600.
You wish.
I wish. God.
That was like $250 each.
Yeah, 250 each.
Yeah.
So,
That's with like super reduced shipping costs.
yeah. And you don't have to use a horticultural table. There's other
use
methods
anything.
of using. Yeah.
No, they
Yeah,
are larger.
there are-
It is about this size. It's
That's
8 by
about-
3.
Yeah.
8 by
Depending on
3.
the one.
These are great tables to start out with because plastic doesn't rot.
Yeah.
But the legs will rust. So
Eventually. Just depends on what you're working with, what you got. You can use.
That extra for lights that comments.
we did
Oh
add,
yes,
we
this
did add
is
extra
yeah.
fertilizer.
So for our circumstances, like I said, native plants love drainage, and usually I've found like almost a 50-50 at times, sometimes a 60-40.
50-50 in winter in a wet
Yeah,
place.
for sure. It depends on the time of year. Yeah, we're in places like Kapahi, Limahuli, places that can get a little more rain. If you're in a place like Kekaha, you're gonna want a lot more of the
Moisture
mix.
retaining
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Less perlite. And in if you're doing cuttings in a dry place, perlite's probably not the best option. I'd go
Totally.
something like vermiculite.
Yeah, vermiculate's also great, and that's a media we haven't even gone into, and that's like another really great one to use for sure.
Okay, so we've potted up from our seedling tray to our 2-inch pot. So these are 2 inches. These are our little guys.
Oh, if I can mention one thing real quick, a great thing to limit the spread of disease, pests, all that good stuff. When we are using these pots and reusing them, what me and Ezikio will do is do a light bleach solution and soak them. And just a nice light one that's gonna just kill every pathogen, fungi, all the weird little bitties that may have grown on the last one. It's just gonna limit the spread of pathogens and keep your nursery as clean as possible. So a light bleach solution, soaking the pots one by one. It's never a bad thing.
Okay. And so now
He's a little
we got to
bigger.
get out of our 2-inch pots and
Look at
into our 4-inch pots. So why are we up potting, Brendan?
We are up potting because these plants are constantly growing. They keep growing and their roots keep growing. And if those roots keep growing and you keep it in that little pot, eventually it's going to stop growing down. It's going to start growing out and it's going to start twisting. It's going to wrap around itself because it's still going to keep growing. And eventually, if you let it keep twisting, it's going to wrap around the plant and then it'll get root bound. And when things get root bound, that essentially means roots swell in a really weird way. It'll wrap around the plant itself and choke itself out. Even if the plant looks fine, you'll put it in the ground and then later the plant will die. And you're like, why did it die? If you left it in the pot too long, it's almost certain that it got root bound and choked itself out with its own roots.
A lot of times, well, not a lot of times, but sometimes something will die in the garden and it's been there for a while and like, we're like, oh, it's doing really well. And you go and check it out after it's dead, you pull it out and there's just like, it's a stem and then just like a corkscrew of root right there. And it
Totally.
it died of being root bound.
And that's another problem with a lot of nurseries that you buy from. They're not being super ethical. Will just kind of sell you plants that they know have been in the pot for too long. And
Or haven't been in the pot long enough.
yeah,
But that's a whole
another
other
thing.
story.
Yeah. Depends on the plant. Certainly some plants will react better than others. Usually like sedges, like monocots, like a carex or something will just like go to town and cut the roots and it'll be totally fine. Something like hibiscus might react a little more poorly to something like that. It'll shock it probably, especially when you get into some of the rare plants that we work with. It's generally advised not to touch the roots at all. But
What we try to aim for is as soon as we see the roots reaching the bottom of the pot, oh, excuse me. As soon as we see the roots reaching the bottom of the pot, we know it's time to up pot. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes it goes a little longer than that, but we try to avoid letting it go longer than ever possible.
And also it's going to limit the amount of time they're in each pot. It's going to limit the possibilities of weed growth within your pot. So less micro weeding to do, less pathogens that are going to get in. It's just generally better to stay on top of things.
So we're gonna up pot, which means we put a little bit of soil in the bottom of the pot, equal to the height that we need this plant to go to. So we don't want it to be sitting right. We don't want the soil to be right at the surface. We don't want it to be right at the bottom. So about like an inch or so.
What happens when it's right at the surface, Chico?
Right at the surface, you end up with a full pot of roots, which is not so good. you end up with overflow.
overflow. So when like heavy rains and stuff come, your media is just gonna spill out onto the ground, and
That's
you're
not
gonna lose
good.
some stuff. And that's it's not great.
Wasteful.
Very.
There is an environmental cost with being horticulturalists. This soil, this growth medium that we're using is not really ethical in the grand scheme of things. We are currently working on establishing relationships with composters and soil makers on Kauai, but in the meantime, we're using a material that, yeah, it's a big environmental cost for the places that it's from.
Yeah.
Right? This is not, this is organic material that's taken mostly from the wild. Some instances it can be more sustainably sourced, but in others, less so.
Yeah.
So
Something to keep in mind.
we don't want to waste. Coconut coir is a great option.
Yes.
I'd say always test it out
For sure.
on something that you're a little less concerned with, because sometimes they have high salt contents or trace minerals that are toxic to plants. So toxic to plants. Yeah. There's been some studies that show pretty high levels of arsenic in coconut coir. And that can just be from sometimes the industrial processes.
Yeah.
So I used to go to the Moʻolelo place and grab compost.
Yeah.
I'm really worried about the termites and the rhinoceros.
CRB,
beetles. So
right.
if you have any advice, you could go in there and get. Or
Good
is that
question.
like a hard topic?
I mean, Kim can answer more specifically about that place, but I would say, generally
Yeah, yeah.
speaking, it's good to get a local compost. That's a great
Yeah.
option.
Yeah.
In these current times where we're having to be more cautious about our invasive species, I would say pay attention, talk to people who know and have had experience at that place. And then if you really want to use that particular material, have an isolation situation. But have a very, very secure place to store it and monitor it before you use it or spread it anywhere.
And also better to, if possible, to use mulch that's within your area. The less spread of mulch around, the better.
Yeah. So you saw us like tipping those seedlings over, like I can tip this over and it doesn't fall out. I can't do that right now because I did not push the soil down hard. I put the seedling with all the roots in right there, then I added soil and I gently compressed all around it to make sure that it's seeded, that there's a smooth transition between the old soil and the new soil, but I did not pack this down. I still want to make sure that there's room for the roots to grow. And but we don't want air, so that's why I'm pushing down. Air means rot. It creates voids for pathogens, fungi, nematodes to all live in, and we want to avoid that. So it should be nice and firm on the outside. That's good.
Okay, so when we up pot something, Zuko, we don't want to bury it too much, right?
I
That's
get
like-
so mad about this.
I know this is something Zuko constantly
Ooh.
tells a lot of the people who are volunteering with us in the nursery, or just a good thing to remember when you're first working with plants like these. You
Above
don't-
ground parts, above ground.
Mhm.
Below ground parts, below
Below
ground.
ground.
Roots
Yeah.
go in the ground, stems go above the ground. If
Yeah.
you put roots above the ground, they dry out, they die. If you put stems below the ground, they rot.
Yeah, so something to remember.
So when you didn't see things have a crown.
Yeah, generally speaking, you can see it in most seedlings when you're working with them. Like going up close to these hibiscus, as you look to it, you'll see like a slight coloration thing from where the root has gone in and now where the main plant is coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah, very evident in some, a little less so in others, especially the smaller things. So you got to have a good eye.
Good eye.
Nice.
Nailed it. Okay, we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
So we're just going to
650.
pretty much do the exact same thing from this 4-inch to the 6-inch. I'm not even going to show you.
Yeah.
But we
You
did.
get the idea. And then you'll do from the 6-inch to the gallon. Usually things are ready to outplant in a gallon, 6-inch or 2-gallon.
Yeah.
Depending on what you want.
Things like vines are really hardy sedges, grasses, ground covers, ferns. They can go into the ground in this size once they're fully rooted out. And you can actually go from 4-inch to gallon. I prefer to go 4-inch to gallon, but again, you just risk having that soil loss and it takes longer for the roots to fill the pot. So who remembers me and Brendan's favorite plants?
Yes.
Not you, Cassie. Who remembers Brendan and I's favorite plants?
Pop quiz. Just a little, maybe there's a prize involved. Who
Mary
knows?
remembers.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Oh. yeah,
Kim,
yeah,
you
yeah.
can't get this. I'm sorry because you have access to so many. But Mary, did you know? Yes. I knew you knew. I saw her say it.
It sounded very convincing.
Yeah,
For
Olana.
Ezikio. Yeah.
Yes. So hibiscus white may I?
And as you guys further your plant journeys, if you don't already have a favorite native plant, you'll probably gain one the more you interact with them.
Or you'll have like 1,000.
Well, that's
Oh,
I
right now.
I would only say because I work a lot with native Hawaiian plants, there are ones that are a lot harder to work with than others. Generally, the sedges when I'm wearing short sleeves, something like ahuava is a freaking nightmare to deal with when you are trying to weed and getting cut all over your hands. But when you have long sleeves, super great. It makes a nice little rope. What about you? You got anything?
Right now, I'm kind of irritated with nanea. I love it very much, but I'm experimenting with it as a living mulch.
Yeah.
And it's a little too aggressive for my purposes. Yes. So I have to take it all out.
Outside of the mala, great.
It's not too aggressive. It's a little too much.
It's being a
It's
little.
great for a living mulch when it's not co-planted.
Yes. Yes.
Co-planting, not a thing. I had some more things that I wanted to talk about. We have 8 minutes, so questions, please get them
Yes.
coming in.
Cool.
So have you guys started sauerkraut seeds?
You ever spread them? I've air layered sour.
I've air layered soursop. I haven't. I know that there can be challenging to grow from seed. They have a long germination. Dormancy. Yeah. So I would just say do a mild scarification and a hot water soak, and then keep them in a well draining medium because they'll rot. They're big seeds, so they'll mold. And if you could do a little wash with either a super dilute bleach solution or isopropyl alcohol to get any mold that's already on it off before you sow it.
Yeah.
But we'll keep the questions to native Hawaiian plants.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just for the purposes of this talk.
Nope.
No, it's not native.
You missed the first part of the talk. Great question.
That's a very great question.
For Hawaiian plants, they have relatively low nutrient needs. So most of the time, okay, so important thing that we didn't really get to talk too much, but I mentioned it briefly, which is that we're living in these times where we've had significant landform changes. So sugarcane soil is bad soil. If you put a plant in the ground and it was doing great in the pot and suddenly it's not doing good in the ground, there can be many reasons, but fertilizing is probably a good idea if you're in a place that has had development of any kind on it. So fertilize when you plant, and then if it's doing well and starts to decline, consider fertilization. There's lots of images online that you can look up, like, oh, nitrogen deficiency or deficiency, and you can compare those photos to the plant that you have. If it's been in the pot for a while, most of this media, like this stuff, is sterile. There's no nutrients really in it at all, which is amazing. Hawaiian plants can do so well in this stuff without fertilizer. That plant had no fertilizer.
No fertilizer.
Yeah. I just added a little bit today because I'm sending it off to you, and it might live in the pot for a little bit longer. It's ready to plant now, but keeping it fertilized will keep it happy. So I would say if you're serious about growing the plants, we really believe in getting them in the ground. They can live in a pot for a long time, but they're going to be happiest in the ground.
Yeah.
If they're going to be in a pot any longer than just the propagation stage, I would say fertilize every 3 to 6 months with a super dilute organic fertilizer, probably 4-fold. Just something really simple.
Also, a good thing to keep in note, like that hibiscus right there, if you're not checking the roots to see if it's getting root bound, generally when a plant outgrows twice the size of the pot that it's in, that's a pretty good
Indicator to get
indicator
it out.
to put that thing in the ground.
Or you're in a super shady area and it's reaching for the sun.
Yeah, for sure.
But also osmocote,
yes.
a lazy horticulturalist best friend.
Yes.
Just do a little sprinkle on top. It's slow release.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it on the 3 to 6 months rate. I would just do it like maybe every 6 months out. There's directions on the bag, all of these things. Any other questions?
That's
Okay, soil question.
Soil
Soil
question.
So pineapple.
Yeah.
right.
Definitely bad soil.
Yeah, totally.
Calm.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
Yes.
Really hard.
Yeah, absolutely
Mhm.
struggling. Is there a way to add cinders and they'll sink down into the soil?
Okay.
Yeah,
Or what
so-
should I do?
Yeah, so
Compost.
there are ways to amend your soil. Compost is a really
the
great
best
way to amend soil. Even there's some really promising studies with koas, koayas, as far as planting them in the bases of all kind, planting them in nitrogen lacking areas, they respond very well to deficient soil and like that kind of rough soil.
Right.
And
You
they'll,
can't plant
yeah. Depending on where you're
Built
wanting to
enough.
plant. Totally. Right. So compost, definitely mulching, amending the soil with cinder, literally like digging into it. And then, but you know, if it's a big area, that's a big project to do. In smaller areas, you can totally do that though.
But organic matter is pretty much the name of the
Organic matter.
game. If you go in, like, our forests are made of organic matter. Like, we're a lava rock island. Like, all the soil we have is degraded lava, which is super low in nutrients, and then organic matter, which is also pretty low in nutrients when you think about it in long or in the short
Grand
scale.
scheme.
Grand scheme. But it's the seabirds
Yes.
and the insect life and the fungi inside that do make certain nutrients bioavailable. So if you've already got things in the ground, do a nice heavy layer away from the stem, but a nice heavy layer of well broken down compost, and then you can do mulch on top of that. And that will eventually work its way down into that hard pan, because you're creating that O horizon, the layer of organic material works its way down into that bad stuff as it breaks down.
Absolutely.
So the insects, you know, as things percolate into the soil, the insects start to live down there too, and it'll all loosen up and get light. We're talking decades, but that's the name of the game with Hawaiian plants.
Patient.
When you're planting, I wouldn't add them on top. It's not really going to do much.
Yeah.
It's not gonna-
It would just be pretty much
Yeah,
a waste.
totally. Yeah.
But if you are worried about drainage when you're planting,
Right.
account for that. You know,
Yeah.
add a little bit more into the hole before you plant.
Mhm.
Make sure that the media that you're planting in is well draining and has a lot of room for organic material to live and nutrients.
Totally.
Yes.
You heard of anybody experimenting with biochar?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. Biochar is good. It's hard to do at scale.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of projects going on Oahu right now, getting